Hello, today we are going to be making a form in Office 365. And by form, I mean SharePoint list, which is basically a data table with an input form. So you'll notice if I am in this view, I've got all of my data rows or my records here in a list format. I can edit these in a grid format. And when I open one of these, it opens in a form. And when people are submitting the form, they get something that looks like this. You have quite a few options as far as field types. So you have the standard people field. So when I'm typing into this, it pops up with the names of users in my organization. I can click that, and that is attached to their Office 365 profile data, which means that if you are connecting to this SharePoint list as a data source in something like Power BI, you can actually expand this person's information and get out their department manager, that kind of thing, any of the fields that your IT organization is actually updating in Office 365. And our choice fields look something like this, where you click and select. You can do multi-select for these if you want to. So like this one will let you select multiple. And there is a date type field that gets a date picker, which is nice. And you also get options like multiple lines of text, which is what this is, where you get a full paragraph of text. There's a few other field types like lookup fields and manage metadata, and I'm not going to go into those today, but they are interesting. Manage metadata is kind of like a tags, hierarchical tags, and lookup fields let you basically relate different items and forms, kind of like objects in a relational database. It's a little bit of a lightweight version of that. So let's jump into this. If you're not sure if SharePoint is the right tool to be using for your form, I am putting together another video on which tools to use in Office 365 when for this type of thing. So the gist of it is that SharePoint is really good if your users that are submitting your form are logged in to Office 365. If you've got anonymous users, usually it's better to use Microsoft Forms. SharePoint is also really good if you want to take advantage of the versioning and permissions options. So SharePoint's got a kind of cool feature where you can set it so that people can only see the items in the list that they've submitted, and you can override that by giving full control permissions to the people that manage the list. But for things like HR forms, like this, in this case, this example is a exit interview form, I would use that option where people can only see their own items. And versioning is something you can enable in SharePoint lists where it'll automatically track who changed what when, which is kind of cool. You also get a recycle bin for these forms. So if I delete something, it'll show up in this recycle bin over here and it'll stay there for 90 days. It's pretty easy to restore things from there. So that's the advantages of SharePoint lists. Okay, let's get started. So let's just navigate back to our home page here, and we're going to click on this plus new option and then select the list. So we are creating a new SharePoint list, and I'm going to make a blank list. They have some templates you can play with here, but we're just going to create one from scratch. All this exists interviews, exit interviews. So you can add a description if you want to, and then choose whether or not it goes in the side navigation here. I'm going to turn this off just so you can see how to go back and find it later if you lose track of where it's at. So these SharePoint lists all automatically go into your site contents in your site. You can usually get to your site contents from the link over here. So it's right here. This is the one that I just made. You can also go to this gear menu up in the top right corner, and that will also have a link to your site contents. All right. So the out-of-box SharePoint list only has one field on it, and that is title. And title is a field that you cannot delete. You can rename it, you can hide it, but you cannot delete the title field. So here's what we're going to do with it. I'm going to add the rest of my fields, and I'll show you how to deal with this extra title field. So we are going to just click on this add column here, and I'm going to enter in my fields. And this first one, I'm going to do a person column. You can use, you can put either people or groups in person type columns. I'm going to call this a name. If the person that is submitting your form is the person that you want to capture. You don't actually have to add a person column. It's going to automatically log the created by user, but in this case, exit interviews are one of those things where it could be submitted by somebody other than the person exiting, like somebody else in HR. So I'm just going to add a person type field. And here's the group toggle if you want to allow selection of groups. I'm going to leave that off. And we are going to require that this field contains information because we always want to have a person attached to our exit interview, and leave the rest of these checked. And if you add a description, it'll show underneath the field title in the form. I don't feel like this needs a description. And oops, we're going to add the rest of our fields. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Reason for leaving. So reason for leaving is going to be choice. So that's like a drop down or a radio button or a multiple checkboxes type of field. And all right, so the choices will automatically come with colors. And if you've got a lot of choice fields, the having a color attached to every single choice value in multiple choice fields can get really overwhelming. And in this case, I don't feel like the color adds anything. I would definitely use the colors for, say, a status field, but in this case, I'm going to switch this to no styles. And our choice options, we just type those in here. So it could be like issue with manager and why else do people leave? Another community. All right, if you have more choices, you can add more with this, and you can also, under more options here, allow multiple selections if you want to. I don't really, if you're going to be doing reporting based off of data in your form, try and stay away from allow multiple selections because it makes your collecting your measurements a little bit more nuanced. So in this case, I'm going to leave it off, and I'm going to make this field required. And you can also use, there's an option for, where is it, can add values manually. So this is basically like if they don't see an option that they like in the drop-down box, you can let them type in their own value. I'm going to leave that off in this case, and click on save. Okay, so this next one, I'm going to show you what the yes no looks like. Would you? All right, so yes no forces you to select a default value. This, I don't think this happened in classic SharePoint. This is a modern thing. So I don't love that it makes you select something. So I'm actually going to change this to a choice and just make my choices yes and no. Because oftentimes having something in there as the default will influence how people interact with the form. So people have a tendency to just leave things on the default some of the time, and we want to make sure that they're forced to select something. And that's the behavior you can get if you set the default value to none and then force them to select something with this require that the column contains information setting. All right. And I'm going to add one more that is a text column. And text is, let me type in the question first. So this is basically going to be the field where people can dump their story for leaving the organization if they want to. So single line of text fields have a maximum number of characters of 255, and we want to allow people to do more than that. So we're going to change this to multiple lines of text. So multiple lines of text will basically let you put in however much you want. And we're going to leave off this enhanced rich text setting. What this does is it, it lets you format your text, but it also inserts HTML and that kind of thing into your text field. So if you're trying to do reporting based off of it, it's usually better to leave this as just straight plain text. And we're going to leave this one as not required and click save. All right, so let's see what our form looks like so far. I'm just going to click on this plus new button and that'll open up the form. And I like how this is just sitting there on top of that. That's very helpful. All right, so if we fill this out, looks like our drop downs are working fine. I am going to now show you how to deal with this title field. If you have a field in your form that you are expecting people to type just a little bit of text into, like a short description kind of field, you can just rename this title field. We're going to hide it, but I'm just going to show you how to do that. So go to your gear menu up here and then go to list settings. And if you want to rename the title field, just click on it and you can type in whatever you want for the title name here. I am going to set a default value for this field because when we hide it, it's still going to be required. And if it is required and there's no default value, then you'll get an error. So I'm just going to call this view form. The title field in SharePoint is the field that is always used to open the form to read it. And so you want it to have some text and something that indicates that people should click on it is useful. That's why I'm calling it view form here, and click OK. All right, so now we are going to go into this advanced settings setting, and we're going to turn on allow management of content types. And content types in SharePoint are collections of fields. So you can have multiple content types on a SharePoint list, and they can have different fields associated with them. Some of them can be shared, some of them may be not shared, but all of the fields will all live on the list, if that makes sense. So you might use this if you have different variations of very similar forms. You could use content types. We're going to turn it on just so that we can hide the field primarily. And while you're in here, this is also where the setting is that only allows users to see the things that they've submitted to their form. So this item level permissions section is where you can set it so that they can read items that were created by them and edit items that were created by them. And this, again, this setting is really good for any kind of more sensitive forms where you don't want people to be able to read everything in the form, just the things that they've submitted. And you can override that by giving full control access to specific users. And if you don't see this permission setting, it does require you to have quite high permissions in the SharePoint site, so at least site owner access to the site that you're in. So you may have to get a SharePoint admin to set this for you if you don't see it or get your permissions bumped up. All right, so we're going to click OK at the bottom here. And now we have a new section in our settings called content types. And in content types, we have one content type called item. And we're going to just click on the word item to open up the content type settings for that specific content type. And this is where you will see the status of the fields, whether or not they're required or optional or hidden. And you can change these by clicking on them and setting to hidden here. Will not appear in forms. Click OK. You can also change the order of the fields in the form here if you want to. So this column order is going to let you rearrange things. You basically just choose the position you want it in. Okay, so our title field is hidden. Now we are going to go turn content type management setting back off. You can click on the settings breadcrumb in the navigation up here to get back. And the reason that we turn it off is because sometimes in SharePoint forms, if you've got content type management on, you'll get a drop down for your select your content type. And the only option that drop down is going to be item. And sometimes it'll show up, sometimes it won't. I like turning it back off just so that we never see that because it's not helpful to anyone. So I'm just going to go back to advanced settings and turn this back off. And that's going to keep the setting that we applied to hiding the title field, even though that setting is now turned off. So if we go to our form now, so you'll notice that the title field is still showing in the list view, and that's what we want because remember that's the field that people use to click on the item to open the form, to view or edit an existing form. So we want to leave that there, but if we look at our form, you'll notice that it's not in the form anymore, which is what we were going for. And this would be a good time to edit your view. So if you want to, say, add the created date as a field to this table view, you can just click on this All Items view here and click on Edit the Current View. And you can rearrange the fields in the view here. So if you don't like the order that they're appearing in, or if you want to hide some of them, you can just uncheck the boxes next to them. And I'm going to add in the created and created by, and then add a default sort for created. Created is the created date, and do it descending. Got OK at the bottom here. Let's add a couple of inputs here. I'm just going to do these super quick, so fast forward a little. So I'm exiting for this reason. Would I recommend? Yes. Here. I'm going to do one more. All right. So in our form, you'll notice it still has an attachment section. There's not a toggle to turn this off in settings. If you want to remove this, you have to use Power Apps. And just a tangent on Power Apps, if you do decide to use the Power Apps integration for SharePoint, it's in the gear menu in your list settings and in this form settings section. If you click on this here, it'll let you customize your form in Power Apps, and you can just delete the card that has the attachment on it if you want to. I try to stay away from using Power Apps whenever possible because it creates another maintenance layer on top of what you're already doing in this list. So as of today and as of the last number of years, if you add a field to your SharePoint list, if you change the name of a field in your SharePoint list, or you change the description of a field in your SharePoint list, Power Apps doesn't get the memo, so you have to go in and do the exact same thing in Power Apps. And it can get a little bit tedious, and oftentimes when you hand a form off to somebody else, they may or may not know Power Apps. So I like to, if I don't need Power Apps for something, I don't use it. Again, just to avoid extra complexity, keep it simple. But if you want to make your form pretty or fancy or do crazy stuff with it, then Power Apps is definitely where you want to go. But I'm gonna not go into that today. All right. So we have one more thing we need to do before this is ready to go, and that is setting the permissions on the form. So when you're creating these, you'll often end up putting them in, say, your team workspace. And if you want everybody in your organization to be able to submit your form, they are often not going to already have edit permission or contribute permission on your SharePoint site. And we need to, in this case, grant them permission to submit the form. So we're going to go to this permissions for this list setting. And because right now it's inheriting the permissions from its parent site, we need to break permission inheritance in order to change permissions. And that sounds kind of scary, but it's not a big deal really. It does require a pretty high permission level to do this. So if you don't see this option or it's grayed out, it is probably your permissions that are the problem. So I'm going to click on Stop Inheriting here. It's going to give me a scary message. I just click OK. And now what I can do is typically your all staff group, if this is a reasonably public site, they're going to be in this visitors group. So you can either change by clicking edit the visitors group to contribute access, or you can add permissions. So grant permissions to, you do everyone except external users in here. And go to show options, uncheck this send an email invitation box. I don't think that this will actually email everyone except external users if you leave this checked, but haven't been willing to try it. So if you try it and find out, let me know. So we're going to change this to contribute and then share. If your IT organization has a security group that has everyone at your company in it, it's often better to use that than the everyone except external users, because this group is literally all user accounts in your tenant, and that can be service accounts, it can be accounts that are used for different processes, that kind of thing. So it's not truly people necessarily, it's like literally all the accounts. So if you've got a security group, use that. But I don't, in this particular case, have one. So I'm just going to use everyone except external users and click on share. And now everyone except external users has access to submit the form. This page doesn't update automatically. You have to refresh it if you want to see your changes. And we do still have the setting that people can only see their own items. So having everyone have contribute access is not a big deal in this case. If you have people that you need to be able to see all items when you have that setting on, you can go to permissions and make sure that the people that need to see everything have full control access. So if they're not in the owner group, you can add them in the same way just to give them full control in this drop down. That'll bypass the everyone can see their own items setting. One more thing while we're in here, we are going to turn on versioning if it's not already on. So versioning settings is this link right here. And I'm showing you where it is because the default option or the default setting for versioning keeps changing in Office 365. So there was a time when you had to turn this on for SharePoint lists because it was off by default. It looks like it is now on by default and keeps 50 versions of history. So you can change this number to whatever you want. You can turn it off if you want to. It looks like it is currently on by default, but maybe you want to check it, make sure that it's on if you want it on. You can also do content approval in here, but you would need to use Power Automate to make a workflow associated with that if you want to have it be functional. So just a quick overview of the list view for your form. So this edit in grid view here will open it up in kind of a spreadsheet view. You can add new items from here. You can also, if you're trying to import some stuff from Excel, it is possible to copy and paste from Excel into a grid view in SharePoint. All you do is make sure that your columns match up between the two sources, or the source and the destination, and then paste it into this first cell. When you paste, make sure that the cursor isn't blinky in the fields because that'll try and force everything into this one cell. So just click it once to select it once and paste, and it should fill in. You can also export to Excel here if you want to. What we're going to do later in a later video is connect to this list directly with Power BI to create our own reporting off of it. If that sounds interesting to you, by the way, make sure to subscribe so that you get notified when that comes out. Okay, so now we need to get a link directly to our form, because when you're trying to get somebody to fill something out, if you link them to this list view, they may get confused and not know what to do. So you want to link them directly to the form URL. So if you click on the new form, there's a copy link option in here, but if for whatever reason that isn't doing it for you, if you just erase this allitems.aspx, which is the view name, and just put in new form.aspx, this is always, always, always going to be the URL for the form. So if I go here, you'll see that it pops up the form in its own window. So all right, our form is done, so thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.